Laugh is and has always been a sign of joy and happiness for most people in our world. Darwin affirmed that men express their emotions in the same way, an innate capacity we have to communicate through gestures with our neighbors a universal language. Blind or deaf children who have never seen or heard a person laughing around them smile when they feel happy. Studies carried out by Richard Weissman from Hertfordshire University clearly show that most universal and funniest jokes are those playing with words and leading to an absurd and illogic situation. What happens in our brain from the very moment when someone tells us a joke and we start laughing? New techniques studying brain images allow us clearly to know how our brains process sense of humor. Images obtained through functional magnetic resonance when volunteers read or listen to a joke show that in order to understand it, we use precisely the same areas we use to process our language. We use some parts of the cerebral cortex to process words being received to realize if what we have listened to or heard has any sense. Besides that, we use an area of the brain when something illogic or absurd provokes a pleasant emotion. And finally, a guffaw of laughter is produced when we use a third layer of our brain. A good sense of humor requires an agile and flexible mind, since the processes needed to understand a joke, find it amusing and laugh, synchronize very rapidly. When first we listen or read words, our receptors in our eyes and ears immediately send their data to the brain. At that moment, the left cerebral hemisphere starts to put in order the data being received, while we try to unveil a logical ending of the story. Besides that, a small area in the right hemisphere becomes active, allowing us to imagine the story from an absurd or illogic perspective. To understand that absurd setting, we use two areas implied in language processing. These two areas are basic to understand the coherence of what we hear at the beginning of the story and to detect the inconsistency of a joke. In order to contrast what we have imagined with the unexpected final result, we have to make use of our short-term memory. It is really a network of neurons storing our reasonable expectations of the story while we keep receiving information which in a precise moment swings absurdly against what it was expected. We distinguish then what is reasonable and what is absurd, and what we find absurd becomes amusing. For something that is amusing, our brain has at its service, and in a complete natural way, the so-called error warning center. Localized in the back medium zone of frontal cortex, neurons located there become active immediately after one of them starts doing something incorrect. That innate capacity of the human being to detect errors always has a reward.
Jim, what? I'm cat, watch.
At that moment, our brain has detected an absurd situation. But in order to provoke a feeling of amusement and laughter, an area processing the feelings located in the second layer of the brain has to become active. As many other positive stimuli, what is funny or absurd activates an area in the third layer of the brain, and where dopamine, the hormone of happiness, is produced. This hormone then activates the switch of the reward system. The switch then starts sending signals of happiness to the prefrontal cortex. At the same time, the system of reward and pleasure generates a euphoric reaction. Men and women process the form of information differently. Comparing what happens in their brains when exposed to the same jokes allows us to understand better the emotional component of the sense of humor. Women activate two more regions of the brain, the area of the language and that involved in short-term memory. Research carried out by Weissman reaches the conclusion that men tell more jokes, but women enjoy humor much more. Why? Women generate a greater activity in the central switch of the reward system. The way the brain of a woman processes information leads to a greater integration of knowledge and emotion, thus reaching a very high pleasant response. The brain of a man not integrating that much the emotional component expects the reward of the absurdity of the joke, independently of being or not being amused. However, it should be kept in mind that finding something more or less amusing is highly personal, and it depends on the intensity of the emotion provoked. Mental activity favors the development of short-rate memory. Therefore, sense of humor increases if we have a fluid and creative intelligence. It has been shown that laughing is healthy since our heart beats faster and oxygen supply to our brain increases. When we laugh, we feel relaxed. Stress goes away. Persons with a good humor have a healthier immune system and suffer heart attacks 40% less than those people with bad humor. And people with good humor live 4.5 years more than average. When we observe the animal world, we can see that some animals make gestures similar to human laughter after escaping from a danger or when they are playing, but they do not tell jokes and do not laugh at them. Laughter springs from the oldest part of the brain, the part responsible for the control of primitive emotion, such as fear and joy. Signaling systems used by animals, such as special grounds, are warnings that predators are close or food is at hand. These reactions are not conscious, as their brains lack the powerful bundle of fibers present in the human brain that connect the language areas and permit to play around with words when telling or understanding jokes. We may conclude that humor and happiness are genuinely human and universal. Happiness is associated with getting along well with oneself and the environment, and to achieve that matters above all our sense of life and our relationship with others. If we could laugh when we came across difficulties to be happy, could mean that we already overcame them.